Hi everyone. Today let's talk about moss. Whether you have to moss up your bonsai for a show, for an exhibition, or you just want it to look nice on your growing tables, you have to learn how to moss up a bonsai correctly. So that's what I'm going to show you today. Today's seminar is all about moss. By the way, if you like these videos, it's the second one I'm doing today. We're really on a roll here. If you like them, subscribe to them and get your friends and your other bonsai buddies to subscribe to them so that we can keep on making them for you. All right? So today I'm getting started mossing this tree. It is a larch. I'm going to start by taking off some of its summer fertilizer. Some of it here, it's organic fertilizer, basically chicken shit. It's in tea bags, and I've made cakes, and I put them on every 7 to 10 days. But we're taking them off. Now, this larch here is growing in quite a coarse bonsai mix. It's ironic actually, because when these larch are collected, they're collected mainly in old peat bogs on the tundra in northern Quebec, and they're growing in quite wet conditions. But when you pot them up in a bonsai pot, the soil has to be fast draining. So I've used a coarse and medium soil, but no fines. And the moss actually cannot grow almost at all on very coarse bonsai mix. They need a very, very compact soil mix on the surface. Moss are primitive, or botanically, they're primitive plants. They don't even have a root system to transport nutrients to the growing part of the moss. So they actually attach themselves to the soil by what are called rhizomes, but they get all their nutrients and humidity from dew or from rain falling on the plant itself. So we need to have a very fine soil mix so that the rhizomes can attach themselves to the moss. So I'm taking off some of the medium size soil and I'll replace it with fine. Here we have a little, it's called a trunk cleaner. This will help me get some of the soil off here. And we don't need much of a layer of this fine soil mix. It'll be about 2 millimeters or a 1/16 of an inch. We don't need much, but we do need finer soil mix. I said earlier that we must leave a collar, which is a little empty spot between where the soil is and the edge of the pot, so that water will accumulate in that spot and your fertilizer won't run off either. So the water we have to avoid the water running off. Okay, now we've got some of the coarse removed. We will replace it with fine. It's basically a mixture of fine akadama with some fine chabasai and a little bit of other type of pumice. Okay, and now moss will never cling to dry soil mixes, so we have to wet it down. Okay, here we go. I think it's going to be wet enough for the moss to stick to it. Now, mossing up a bonsai is not as easy as most people think it is. In Japan, they'll use up to 30 different species of moss. Actually, you want moss that's quite short, very compact. You don't want any coarse-looking moss. You want really fine, velvety moss. That said, you need to have different textures and different colors, okay? Because you have to make the surface of your bonsai appealing. Now, when you start mossing up your tree, you never cover the main roots because you want people to see the nabari, the base of your tree. So the moss will go between the big roots, but not on the roots or on the trunk. Stay away from the big roots or the trunk. You need to, with big roots, the moss will go between them, never more than halfway up the root, all right? So once we've got that principle down, now let's imagine if this tree was growing in nature. This represents an immense, wild, slanting tree somewhere growing in a very windswept area. And to moss it up, when you think of that environment, here the foliage canopy is really large. So there would be no sunlight getting under the tree. You would just have old needles maybe. You would have debris. Or if you have moss, it would be very shady. So next to the trunk, you want to use darker colors of moss, and you can use your slightly taller mosses. Not that tall, but slightly taller. So we're going to go for some coarser, darker colored moss right here. Now, yeah, this moss that I'm using, I actually collect from some of my bonsai, or I'll go to local garden centers where they have automatic watering systems, and so the moss grows quite easily on the ground. And I'll go with these plastic trays and collect it. And actually keep the moss in these trays. I'll just lay one layer of newspaper on the bottom to hold a bit of humidity. There are drainage holes in the bottom of these trays, and keep it in a relatively shady area. Water it at the same time I'm watering my bonsai, and it'll keep for the whole summer if you keep it humidified. So yeah, you'd always have a supply of moss for when you need it. And boy, do you ever need moss often when you're a bonsai person. Now, the moss, when it's collected, comes with a sort of a layer of old soil underneath it. And if you get it from nature, I like moss that grows in very sunny areas, because when we grow our bonsai, we grow them in full sun most of the time. And if you plant moss that grows in a shady area, it will just die in full sun. Also, don't go and collect moss on tree trunks or rocks. It's not adapted to growing on bonsai soil and will die, okay? Don't try to attach lichens. Lichens is a symbiosis between a moss and an algae, and lichens just won't attach to the soil. They take about 30 years to get established. So go and collect moss from a sunny area. I usually collect a nice variety. It's a bluish silvery color. It's called Bryum argenteum, and you can get it between patio tiles. I collect it sometimes in sunny parking lots. I might look a little bit weird wandering around a parking lot with a tray and my little scraper here, scraping it all up. But I have the moss to prove it. Okay, now the moss comes with a coating of whatever debris was on that asphalt or between those patio tiles. Often there's insects in it. Often there's, there's everything. There's millipedes, there's ants, there's larvae. So you want to remove all of that and also remove any excess soil. As I said, moss don't have roots, so you can't kill it. And the reason why we're removing the excess soil is because it's going to make it easier for those little rhizomes to attach themselves to your soil. So either with a knife, you can use a fine knife, you can use a box cutter, just remove all that excess soil, okay? Now, usually if the moss is dry, you want it to be wet so it'll cling, okay? You don't want very big pieces of moss. Probably the size of a quarter is best, because if you use big pieces, when it's put on the tree, it looks really monotonous. So you don't want to have big pieces. So you're going to use little pieces. If it's not wet enough, I have a tray next to me, and I dip it in water and I squeeze out the excess water, all right? And then, because this is very dark moss, I'll take just a little piece. And you want to use very irregular pieces, because assembling the moss around a bonsai is a little bit like putting a jigsaw together, all those weirdly shaped pieces. If they're all perfectly round, God, it looks so man-made, it looks so artificial that shoot yourself if you do that, okay? You don't want that. So you have to put it piece by piece. I'm putting it next to the root, between two roots here. And then what you do is you press it down in the middle to make contact very hard, and then press around the edges. All right? So that's the first piece laid down. Now you want another that's not the same color. So that is always the challenge, to always get different textures and different colors. So okay, so here we go. Why do you think the Japanese insist that bonsai should be mossed up for an exhibition? Does anyone know that out there? Up until about between the First and Second World War, bonsai were not allowed inside a Japanese home in the tokonoma, okay? The tokonoma was a sacred place, only for sacred objects. Very family saints, or very stuff that belonged to the ancestors. So you couldn't dirty the tokonoma with a bonsai, because a bonsai was growing in dirt, okay, which was like untouchable. And especially those abura kasu, the fertilizer balls, they smell, and they're made of basically some type of shit. So that was a no-no. You couldn't put the bonsai in the tokonoma. But there were Japanese that wanted to put this beautiful object in their tokonoma. So in a typical Japanese manner, they got around it by saying, okay, we'll cover all the surface with moss, and then you will not see the soil and you will not see the fertilizer. And that was the way they resolved that problem. So when you are showing a bonsai, the entire surface, when you are putting a bonsai in a show, the entire surface should be covered in moss. Not just parts, all of it. Okay? So let's go on. I keep going off on these tangents, everyone. I am sorry. Okay. Here I've got a little cushion holding the tree in the pot. Now I repotted this tree in the spring, so let's imagine if it was going in a show. I could not have that showing. I would have to remove it. So right now I just hope the tree is well established in its pot. I will cut away the anchoring wire and the little cushion, the little tubing that it's in, okay, so that it will not show. Another thing you want when you're mossing up a tree is it should never look even, okay? Because nature does not create like astroturf, okay? You do not want a completely level playing field. When you look at trees growing in nature, the ground has little like valleys, peaks and valleys. And so your soil should be uneven. Sometimes it can be higher on one side, lower on the other. And that's important to give it a really natural appearance. So yeah, I'm often surprised by people putting on moss and it looks too perfect. So always try to be a little bit yin and yang. Have those imperfections. That's what you want. Now I am taking bigger pieces, but before I put it on the tree, I am breaking it up into smaller pieces. This has a different texture. Just here in the province where we live, it is said that there are over 350 species of moss, okay? Now, I know my friends in California, you can't grow moss in California. It's just too hot and dry. I remember going one year to the National Exhibition. I got there on the Thursday to set up my display, and some fellows that were displaying their bonsai from California discovered I had brought extra boxes of moss. Boy, they were around me like flies around honey. They just needed moss. They were desperate for it. So I was happy to oblige. Now, as we go toward the outside of the pot, there's where the sunlight would penetrate, say between these branches. The sunlight would get into here. I also brought a bonsai with a plant that looks just like moss, but it is not moss, it has roots. It originates in Southeast Asia and is often used on the surface of bonsai. It's called Talatriche Terrestrus, and it is not hardy. It's a very bright green. It's a pretty plant that spreads quite rapidly. It's a ground cover, as you can see, and I use it on my trees. I like using it because of the bright color. It's not hardy here. So what happens is it dies in winter, but it reseeds itself in spring. So I never lack some. There's always some around. It grows back in the spring. I'm using moss with quite a different texture right here. Now we're going to use this paler colored. It's not as pale as the Talatriche or Talatriche, Callitriche. It's actually came in on a bonsai many years ago at the Botanical Gardens, and we had trouble identifying it. So finally, it was sent to many botanical gardens, to their herbariums throughout the world, and one botanist finally succeeded in identifying it. So that's the way I got the name of it. You really do have to press it down hard. In Japan, I once helped make a Japanese garden, and being young and naive, I was shocked when the Japanese garden masters started putting the moss on the ground, and they shoved it into the ground with the heel of their boots. Well, they don't wear boots. They wear those funny, like rubber, oh, they're like rubber boots. Anyway, they shoved it in so hard, I was afraid they were going to kill the moss, and they laughed. They thought it was funny. They were quite cool with doing that, and that is the way that they assured themselves that the moss would be well attached to the ground. So this is where the sun will penetrate here. So we've made a nice little sunny area with our paler colored moss and our Talatriche Terrestrus right there. This is slightly finer. It's always best to moss up a bonsai about a month before a show. You know, give yourself a good time period, because if you do it far enough in advance of the show, you can literally leave little spaces between the moss. And if the spaces are large, you actually can put some fine akadama dust or something and brush it slightly into the spaces. And then the moss will expand, grow into those areas, okay? And that gives you that nice up and down, that the rugosity on the top of the soil surface that everybody loves so much when you look at a well-mossed bonsai. So don't do it the night before. It always looks just done. So yeah, don't do that. There's another thing that a lot of people use as a moss substitute that's, should be avoided at all costs. It's called marchantia, is the Latin or botanical word. The common term is liverwort, and it's related to moss. I'm looking for a piece here. Sometimes I have some big pieces of liverwort. Here we go. It often grows in moss. You see this green stuff here? It's flat, okay? It's called liverwort because I think the elders actually used it to create a potion to cure liver ailments. But it's a horrible thing because it spreads on your bonsai and it takes over, and it's an indication that you're overwatering your bonsai, and really it'll choke off your bonsai, your roots won't get any more air, and your bonsai can literally die. So never, if you ever see any liverwort on the surface of your bonsai, dig it out, throw it out, get rid of it, okay? There's another type of plant that some people call Irish moss. It's actually Armeria, a horrible thing too, because it spreads very quickly and robs all the nutrients of your bonsai. So do not under any conditions use Irish moss for growing bonsai. And we're progressing here. We want, how could I put it? We want it to look natural, so we don't want all the same things. Sometimes also in nature, you know, there are little plants growing on the ground underneath our trees. So especially if I have a place where I don't have a good nabari, I don't have good roots, or there's a place that I find I want to attract the eye to that place, what I'll do is I'll use a little miniature fern. Okay. These miniature ferns are called Selaginella. The Japanese call them golden ferns. Selaginella colocens is the botanical name. They are not quite hardy in Canada either, so I don't leave them outside. And I grow them in small bonsai pots. And literally when I'm doing rock plantings, or I want to add a nice little natural touch to my bonsai. Like here, there's a space between the roots here. So what I would do is I would dig it out a little bit here. Because the fern always grows somewhere near the base of a tree. And I would actually just transplant it into there. Just where it would grow. You wouldn't have it growing right in the middle somewhere. You want it to find a little niche that it can grow in. And you don't want to use too much of it, because once I had a lot of it on a bonsai, and a famous Japanese expert came and visited my collection and said, "Too much lettuce, get rid of the salad." So he thought there was too much, and I agreed with him. So yeah, you have to be careful. In bonsai, never overdo anything. I've still remembered that lesson that Mr. Susumu Nakamura gave to me. Okay, we're progressing well. As I say, I'm trying to do it like a little jigsaw puzzle. I'm constantly looking for different colors and textures of moss so that visually it'll be exciting or stimulating. You don't want it to look regular. You don't want it to look monotonous. So you really do have to use different types of moss. Now all of this moss here was mostly collected at a plant nursery. It was growing in full sun. So I know it'll grow well. Sometimes you can sow moss in a way. What you do is collect some moss, dry it for a few days, run it through a sifter, and then you can spread the spores. Every piece of the moss that you dried and you put through your sifter will regenerate, okay, and grow. But you have to keep it moist. To do that, the best thing to do is I used to cover it with a cheesecloth to keep all the spores in place when I watered. And when it started to grow, it would actually grow through the cheesecloth, and it would create a really nice moss cover. Okay, I know once I got to see the back of Mr. Kimura's, Masahiko Kimura's nursery, and I saw the way he grew moss. He actually laid a layer of plastic on a bonsai growing table and spread just the thinnest layer of soil, and then spread moss spores, and the whole table was covered in green. And whenever he needed moss for a show, they would just scrape it off, and it would be very, very thin, so they wouldn't have to cut away these thick pieces. So I thought, how clever. But I really haven't gotten around to doing it. But anyway, there are all kinds of little tips and shortcuts that you can get when you go to Japan and learn all of these things. Now I need another piece of something bright over here. So we're almost finished. We're getting there. You always want to put the best pieces in the front. That's where people are going to see it. And if you don't have enough, use the uglier stuff toward the back. Mind you, a bonsai has to be beautiful from all sides. But yeah, we always put our best foot forward. So, oh, there's a little weed seed growing in there. In Japan, when they're setting the little pieces of moss, they're actually using smaller pieces. They even have a pair of tweezers that's made specifically for taking little pieces of moss, and they'll pick it out of the water or the tray, and they'll put it on the bonsai with these tweezers. So, I mean, they even have specialized tools just for mossing up their bonsai. That's how specialized an art it is to moss a tree up really, really well. Moss will also hide some things. There was a cut off root over here, and I put a slightly thicker piece against it so you couldn't see the cut off part. One day I'm going to have to carve that root down, but in the meantime you can hide it. Now we're coming toward the back part here. I have a dark piece there, so I'll use a lighter piece here. I actually do not have too many choices of color. I would have had to have gone running around the backyard and the neighborhood looking for more varieties. But anyway, you use what you have. The tree always looks better than before, you know, it was mossed up. Once it's mossed up, it's really attractive. Here's another piece of that Talatriche. You just need to put a little bit and it really spreads. You can see how, God, it just takes over, you know, these pots. It just, but you can see it's not a moss, because if you look underneath it, whoops, sorry, you'll see all the fine little roots here. The fine little roots, the white roots. So it is a plant. It flowers. Moss, of course, never flowers. It's spores, all right? So, yeah. Okay, now we will brush off. We have little pieces of some of our bonsai soil. Now, if it was a show, I would get out a fine pair of tweezers, and every little piece of bonsai soil that's showing needs to be removed. It's especially hard if you have add perlite to your potting mix, because the perlite floats up to the top, and boy, it's hard to get rid of. It always shows up. Eventually, it'll green up with watering, and it doesn't show as much. Okay. Okay, well, there you have it, folks. This tree is mossed up. We'll just put a few little dewdrops on top of it, so you'll see what it should look like in a show or on your bonsai tables, and gives you an idea of how beautiful you can make your bonsai with a nice moss covering. All right, it looks so natural, and when it's done naturally, it looks as if it's been there for an eternity. So that's about all there, folks, on my moss seminar, and I hope you enjoyed it. And I'm sure if you're an experienced bonsai grower, you'll probably know all of this, but there's usually just a little tip or two that you can learn from these little seminars. So thanks a lot for watching and listening in, and we'll see you at the next video. Make sure to subscribe. Ask your friends to subscribe if they're bonsai people. You know, get them interested in it. Thanks a lot. Bye. Before I let you guys go, I assembled this little display of how this tree would be presented in a bonsai show. So here you have this wonderful American larch on presented on a burl wood. It's called a Jiita, Jiita. It's a slab made of natural wood, usually a burl. In this case, this I believe is wild cherry. And the complementary plant, they call them shitakusa in Japanese, is a delightful little plant. It's made of a Ranunculus, which is in the butterscotch family, and this is actually called butterscotch ripple, with some golden acorus and the little thalictrum here that's in flower, along again with a little selaginella in a beautiful pot. The pot is made by, oh God, Sampo. Okay, beautiful little pot to set off this wonderful bonsai. So thanks a lot, folks. Bye for now.